The day I found out my twin sister had stolen my entire life, I was standing in a fitting room wearing a bridesmaid dress the color of dried mustard. Not yellow. Not gold. Mustard. The specific shade you find crusted at the bottom of a bottle you forgot you owned. The kind that makes your skin look like you have been quietly unwell for 3 weeks and have not told anyone about it yet. I was standing in that mirror, in that dress, holding a bouquet of fake flowers the wedding planner had handed me to quote-unquote get a feel for the vision, and I thought to myself, this is rock bottom. This is the floor. It cannot possibly get worse than this. I was so deeply, catastrophically wrong. My name is Zara. I am 27 years old. I own a small event styling business that I built from absolutely nothing, one overdue invoice and one very dramatic parking lot breakdown at a time. I am not wealthy. I am comfortable in the specific way that means I can order guacamole without having a quiet, internal emergency about the upcharge. I have my own apartment, my own clients, my own vision board that I redo every January with the energy of someone who genuinely believes this is the year everything changes. And I have a twin sister named Zola. Before I tell you what she did, I need you to understand who Zola is, because it matters. It matters more than you know right now. We came into this world 11 minutes apart. She arrived first, quiet and easy, like she had already rehearsed it. I arrived second, screaming, tangled in my own cord, already making everything complicated. My mother told that story at every family gathering until I was old enough to say please stop, and even then she still told it at Christmas. It became the summary of us. Zola, effortless. Zara, a lot. Growing up, we were close the way twins in small spaces have to be close. We shared everything. A room, clothes, secrets, the kind of whispered conversations you only have after the lights go out and the house goes quiet. Zola was the careful one. She thought before she spoke. She smiled before she committed to anything. She had this way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room without ever actually saying anything particularly meaningful. People loved her for it. I was the one who said too much, laughed too loud, spilled things, accidentally offended people at dinner parties by being too honest about the food, and once, memorably, got my hair caught in a ceiling fan at a client event because I was trying to show someone how tall the ceilings were and misjudged my own height by a remarkable margin. I am 5'9". The ceiling was 9 feet. I genuinely do not know how I managed it. The physics alone should have prevented it. But Zola never made me feel like too much. That was what I loved about her most. She laughed at the ceiling fan story. She brought me coffee when I worked late. She showed up when I needed her, and she did it without making me feel like I owed her anything. We were different in every visible way and identical in the ways that mattered, and for 26 years I thought that was enough to hold us together through anything. I thought that right up until the moment she looked me in the eyes and lied to my face about the man I was falling in love with. If you are new here, subscribe right now because I promise you this story is going to take you somewhere you were not expecting to go today. His name was Cale Morrow. I need you to sit with that name for a second before I continue, because the way I say it even now, 2 years later, still does something complicated to my chest that I have not entirely sorted out. Cale Morrow. 32 years old. Self-made billionaire, which is a word that sounds fake and excessive until you meet someone who actually is one, and you realize the word is not big enough to describe the specific kind of weight a person carries when they have built something that enormous from nothing. He was not the kind of billionaire you see on magazine covers with a yacht and a manufactured smile. He was quieter than that. More contained. He had built a technology company called Morrow Systems from a one-bedroom apartment using money he borrowed from 3 people who believed in him before anyone else did. And by the time I met him, it had become one of the most quietly powerful infrastructure companies in the country. Not flashy. Not loud. The kind of company that runs underneath everything else so smoothly that nobody notices it exists until it stops working, and then suddenly everyone notices. He was exactly like his company in that way. I met him on the worst Tuesday of my professional life. I had just walked out of a pitch meeting that had gone so badly I was still processing whether it had actually happened or whether I had somehow dreamed the entire thing. I had spent 4 months preparing that proposal. For months of late nights and color-coded spreadsheets and a presentation I genuinely believed was the best work I had ever done. The client had smiled at me the entire time, nodded at all the right moments, said things like fascinating and we love your energy, and then told me at the end that they were going in a different direction and also could I validate my own parking because they only had 2 validations left. I walked out of that building with mascara on my chin, a broken heel I had not noticed until I was already on the pavement, and a coffee stain on my blazer that I truly cannot account for because I had not had coffee yet that morning. I was a complete visual disaster. I was also approximately 40% likely to cry in public, which is a percentage I try to keep below 20 on a normal day. I rounded the corner fast because I needed to be around fewer people immediately, and I walked directly into a man standing still on the pavement reading something on his phone. We went down together. His phone hit the ground and the screen shattered into what I can only describe as abstract art. My bag exploded. An entire bottle of perfume I had been carrying around for a month because I kept forgetting to put it on my dresser rolled off the curb and was immediately destroyed by a passing bicycle with a precision that suggested the cyclist had been waiting for exactly this moment. The perfume was called Eternal Promise. It smelled like very expensive flowers and briefly, intensely, like the pavement outside a corporate building on a Tuesday morning. I looked up at him from the ground ready to apologize, and the words just left me. Not because he was attractive, though he was, in a way that was more unsettling than enjoyable, the kind of face that makes you feel like you are not quite standing straight. The words left me because of the way he was looking at me. Not with irritation. Not with the special brand of urban exhaustion people give you when you inconvenience them on a pavement. He was looking at me like I was the most genuinely interesting thing that had happened to him in a very long time. I said, and I stand behind this as a first impression, I said, I think your phone is dead and I am so sorry, but that perfume was a gift and I was already having a terrible day before this, so I might actually cry about the perfume specifically. He said, I have been standing outside this building for 45 minutes trying to convince myself to go back in for a meeting I do not want to attend, and you just made me feel like maybe today is not the day for either of us to be here. Can I buy you coffee to replace your disaster perfume? I should have said no. I was a mess. He was a stranger. I had 3 unanswered emails and a broken heel and a to-do list that was frankly threatening to become sentient. But something in the way he said it, not as a line, not as a performance, but as someone who genuinely needed a reason to not go back into that building, made me say yes. We sat in a coffee shop 2 blocks away for 4 hours. I want you to understand what 4 hours means when you are 2 people who just met on a pavement. It means you stopped noticing the time. It means the conversation had that specific momentum where you keep thinking you should leave, and then one of you says something and suddenly another 30 minutes has passed, and you have both forgotten you have lives to return to. He told me about Moro systems. About the early years when he was running on 4 hours of sleep and the specific terror of watching something you built start to work before you were ready for it to work. He told me about a board decision 3 months earlier that had put him in a position he could not talk about publicly and was slowly making him feel like a stranger in his own company. He did not give me details. He gave me the shape of it, and somehow the shape was enough. I told him about the pitch. About the 4 months. About the client who used the word fascinating 6 times and gave me 2 out of 3 parking validations. He laughed at that, and it was a real laugh, the kind that catches a person off guard, and I remember thinking I want to make him do that again. He walked me to the train station when we finally left. He stood at the bottom of the steps and said, I want to see you again. Not as a question. Not as a performance. As a decision. I went home that night floating in the specific way you float when something genuinely unexpected has walked into your ordinary Tuesday. I went straight to Zola's room because that is what we did. We told each other everything, and I sat on the edge of her bed and told her about the broken phone and the Eternal Promise perfume and the 4 hours in the coffee shop and the way he laughed. She sat across from me and listened with that careful small smile she always wore when she was processing something. She asked questions. Good questions. Thoughtful ones. What does he do? What is the company? How long has he been building it? I told her his name. Cale Morrow. And something moved across her face so quickly I nearly missed it. Something that was not quite surprise. Something that looked, if I am being honest, more like calculation. I missed it. I saw it, and I filed it away in the part of my brain labeled not important, and I moved on because I was happy, and when you are happy you file things in the wrong places. Kale and I spent the next 6 weeks in that particular madness of two people who have found each other unexpectedly and are not entirely sure what to do with it. He took me to dinner at a restaurant so quiet and so expensive that I genuinely thought we had walked into someone's private home by mistake. I cooked for him twice at my apartment and burned something both times, and he ate it without mentioning the burning on either occasion, which is, in my opinion, one of the most romantic things a person can do. We talked on the phone late at night about everything and nothing. He was not an easy person. He went quiet sometimes in a way that felt like doors closing, and I never knew which room of him I was being locked out of. But when he was present, he was completely, utterly present, and that felt rarer than anything. He met Zola exactly once during those 6 weeks. We bumped into her near our family home on a Sunday afternoon. It was brief. 5 minutes. She had a gym bag and headphones around her neck, and she shook his hand and said it was lovely to finally meet him, and then she left. That night Kale was quiet in the car in a way that felt different from his usual quiet. I asked what was wrong. He said nothing, just tired. I believed him. I added it to the not important file. 3 days later he called me and told me he needed space. Not a breakup, he said. Space. He said things were getting complicated, and he needed to focus, and that I deserved someone who could be fully present. He said it gently and carefully, and I remember thinking that was strange, because Kale was never gentle and careful with his words when it was just us. He was direct and sometimes blunt, and occasionally said exactly the wrong thing at the wrong moment, and then looked mildly horrified at himself. This speech sounded rehearsed. This speech sounded like something a person says when they have already made a decision they do not fully want to admit to yet. I cried for 11 days. I am not going to pretend it was less than that. 11 days, varying levels of functionality, one incident involving an entire sleeve of biscuits at midnight that I refuse to elaborate on. Zola was there for all of it. She brought food. She sat with me. She said all the right things. She said Kale was clearly a fool who did not deserve me. She said I was extraordinary. She said whoever ended up with me was going to be the luckiest person alive. She said all of this while already knowing exactly what she had done. I want you to stay right here because what I am about to tell you next is where this story stops being painful and starts being something I genuinely did not see coming, and I need you to be ready for it. Hit like right now if you're invested because it is about to get so much more complicated. For months after Kale ended things with me, my mother threw herself a birthday dinner. The kind of dinner our mother throws, which means it starts at 7 and ends at midnight, and involves at least one relative saying something that requires a debrief the next morning. I arrived on time, which for me means I arrived 7 minutes late and immediately knocked a candle off the entryway table. Normal. Standard. Expected. Zola arrived 40 minutes after me. She came through the front door and she was wearing a dress I had never seen before, deep green, the kind of color that requires confidence to wear, and her hair was different, softer somehow. And she was glowing in a way that made 3 relatives turn toward her simultaneously, like a coordinated movement. I remember thinking she looks like someone who has just become a slightly different version of herself. I remember thinking it absently, the way you think things when you are distracted by your aunt asking you why you are still single at the family dinner that you are already 7 minutes late to. And then I saw the hand. Not the ring. I want to be specific about this. I saw the hand first. The way her hand was tucked into the arm of the man who had walked in behind her. The way she was holding his arm like it was somewhere she had been many times before. Like it was familiar. Like it was hers. I saw the hand, and then I looked up and the man was Kale. The room did not go slow motion the way it does in films. It went the opposite direction. Everything sped up into something sharp and too bright, and I could hear my own heartbeat doing something irregular in my ears. He was standing in my mother's hallway looking exactly the same as he always looked, contained and quiet and slightly separate from everything around him, except now he was holding my sister's hand and looking at her like she had said something interesting. Zola walked him around the room. She introduced him to aunts, to cousins, to the family friend who always smells faintly of mothballs and insists on kissing everyone on both cheeks. She saved me for last. She walked him over to where I was standing near the bookshelf pretending to examine a family photo I had seen 400 times, and she looked me directly in the eyes when she said, "Zara, you remember Kale." The table went quiet. Not because anyone else knew the history. Because they saw my face. And I smiled. I want you to know that I smiled. I extended my hand and shook his hand and said something completely normal that I cannot remember now because my brain was doing 17 things simultaneously in the background and the foreground was running entirely on autopilot. I sat through my mother's birthday dinner, and I did not cry, and I did not make a scene, and I did not knock anything over, which was honestly the hardest part, because I knock things over in significantly less emotionally destabilizing situations than this one. Zola found me in the kitchen after dessert. She said, "I know this is complicated." I said, "How long?" She said, "About 2 months after you two stopped seeing each other." I promise you, Zara. I promise it was not while you were together. I chose to believe her. I needed to believe her. I filed it in the not important drawer, and I told myself that what I had felt for Kale was in the past, and that Zola was my twin sister, and that there were things more important than a man I had known for 6 weeks. What I did not realize was that I had now filled the not important drawer so full that it was no longer able to close properly. And overfull drawers have a way of coming open at the worst possible moment. 8 months passed. Kale and Zola moved at the pace of people who had already covered significant distance before making things official. They got an apartment together, a penthouse in the kind of building that has a concierge who knows your name before you have told it to him. Zola started appearing at the kinds of events she had never cared about before. Charity galas and private dinners and industry gatherings where the canapés cost more than my monthly internet bill. She changed in the way that is easy to miss when you are watching it happen slowly. New clothes. New posture. A new way of carrying herself that looked like confidence, but felt, when I was honest with myself at 2 in the morning, like performance. I told myself I was being uncharitable. I told myself I was still hurt and projecting that hurt onto my sister in a way that was unfair to both of us. I had actual therapy for 3 months about this. My therapist, who is a very patient woman named Dr. Adissa, once looked at me and said, "Zara, I think there are some things you are choosing not to look at directly," and I said, "Yes, I know," and then I changed the subject, and we both pretended that had not happened. Then came the engagement. Zola called me before she told anyone else. She said she wanted me to hear it from her. She said Kale had proposed the previous night with a ring that I could tell from her voice alone was extraordinary, and she wanted me to be her maid of honor because there was no one she trusted more in the world. The silence on my end of the phone lasted long enough for her to say my name twice. And I said yes. Of course I said yes. She was my twin sister. She was the person I had shared a womb with and whispered to in the dark after the lights went out and grown up alongside for 27 years, and saying no felt like cutting off something that had always been part of my own body. So I said yes, and I meant it, and I started planning my sister's wedding to the man I had loved, with all the professional expertise I had spent years building and all the personal agony I had spent months burying. And every single morning I told myself I was fine. I was so committed to being fine that I actually started to believe it. Which is the only explanation I have for why it took me until 3 weeks before the wedding to look in the drawer. If you have been watching quietly and you have not subscribed yet, do it now, because what I found in that drawer is the thing that changed every single thing I thought I understood about the last 2 years of my life. I was at their apartment. Zola had asked me to come over and go through some final wedding details, seating arrangements, and timing, and the specific argument we had been having for 2 weeks about whether the floral centerpieces should be tall or low, because Zola wanted tall, and the venue coordinator wanted low, and I was caught in the middle trying to broker a peace arrangement over flowers. She had stepped out to take a work call. I was in her office looking for the folder of vendor contracts she had asked me to find. Her laptop was open on her desk. The folder was right there on the desktop, not hidden inside other files. Not buried. Just sitting there, labeled with a date. A specific date that I recognized before I fully understood why I recognized it. The date Kale and I had met. The Tuesday with the broken phone and the eternal promise perfume. I should not have clicked it. I knew I should not have clicked it. The specific feeling of knowing you should not do something and doing it anyway is one of the most human feelings there is. I clicked it. Inside were documents. Financial documents. Transfer records going back almost 3 years. A shareholder agreement between a holding company called ZC Holdings and Morrow Systems. And at the bottom of the agreement, listed as the sole director of ZC Holdings, was my sister's name. I read it 3 times. Then I read it a 4th time because I thought maybe I was misreading it. Then I sat back in the chair and stared at the ceiling of my sister's office and let the timeline rearrange itself in my head. ZC Holdings had made its first investment in Morrow Systems 2 years and 8 months ago. That was 7 months before I met Cale on that pavement. That was before any of it. Before the coffee shop and the late phone calls and the burned dinners and the I need space. My sister had a financial relationship with Cale Morrow before I ever knew his name. And then I remembered the something that moved across her face when I told her his name that night on her bed. That flash of something that was not quite surprise. The way she had asked good questions. Thoughtful questions. What does he do? What is the company? She already knew the answers. She was checking whether I knew. I sat in that chair for a very long time. Long enough for the screen to go dark. Long enough for Zola to finish her call and come back into the apartment and call my name twice before appearing in the office doorway and seeing my face. The silence between us lasted maybe 4 seconds. It felt significantly longer. She said, Zara. I said, ZC Holdings. How long? She did not pretend she did not know what I was referring to. I will give her that. She sat down across from me and she told me the truth, or at least the version of the truth she was willing to give me in that moment, and even that version was enough to make me feel like the floor had dropped away entirely. She had met Cale at a business networking event 2 years before I met him on that pavement. She had been trying to grow a small investment portfolio, nothing significant. She had some money saved and a contact who pointed her toward Morrow Systems as a promising early-stage company. She invested. It was a business relationship. Cale barely knew her name for the first year. She was a minor stakeholder, and they communicated through lawyers. Then the board crisis happened. The one Cale had mentioned to me in the coffee shop, obliquely, the thing he could not talk about publicly. 3 board members had attempted to force a restructure that would have significantly diluted Cale's control of his own company. Zola, as a stakeholder, was contacted. She voted in his favor. It was a small thing on paper. In practice, it had shifted the outcome of the vote. Cale had called her personally to thank her. That was the beginning. And then she found out, through a mutual contact, that her sister, me, the clumsy loud one who was always running slightly late and knocking things over, had met Cale on a pavement and spent 4 hours in a coffee shop with him and had come home glowing in a way Zola had not seen from me in years. I need you to pause with me here for a second, because I want you to really feel what I am about to say. She let it happen. She knew who he was. She knew I was falling for him. And she did not say a word. She sat on her bed and listened to me tell her about the coffee shop and the late calls and the burned dinners, and she smiled her careful small smile and said all the right things, and she did not tell me that she already knew this man. That she had a financial stake in his company. That she had voted to protect his ownership of it. She told me later that she genuinely had not planned what happened next. That she had intended to tell me about her connection to Cale before things went further, that she had told herself she would find the right moment. But the right moment kept not arriving, and then Cale ended things with me, and she told herself it did not matter anymore because it was over. Except it was not over. Because 3 weeks after Cale ended things with me, he had called Zola. Not about the company. Personally. And Zola, who had been waiting without knowing she was waiting, had answered. I asked her one question. I asked her, when he called you, 3 weeks after he ended things with me, did you tell him that you were my sister? She was quiet for a moment too long. She said, he knew. He already knew. And there it was. The thing underneath the thing. Cale had known when he was with me that my sister was a stakeholder in his company. He had known when he met her on that Sunday afternoon. The quiet in the car that night was not tiredness. And the call 3 days later asking for space was not about complicated things at work. It was a decision that had already been made. I stood up from that chair and I walked out of my sister's apartment and I did not look back. Do not go anywhere. I need you to stay with me because what happened next is the part that even I still cannot entirely believe, and I have lived through it. I drove home. I sat in my car outside my building for 20 minutes and I did not cry, which surprised me because I am a person who cries at adverts about supermarkets. I was not sad. I was something colder than sad. I was clear in a way I had not been in 2 years, and that clarity felt like the specific calm you get just before a very significant storm. I went upstairs. I opened my laptop. And I started looking. I want to be transparent with you about this part. I am not a corporate investigator. I am an event stylist. My professional skills are choosing flowers that do not clash and talking anxious brides off ledges, and once, memorably, sourcing 37 identical vintage lanterns in 48 hours for a client who had changed her entire aesthetic vision the week before her wedding. I am not someone who knows how to dig through financial records. But I am someone who is meticulous about details, who has spent years building a business by paying attention to things other people overlook, and who is now running on the specific energy of a person who has just realized they have been spectacularly lied to by two people they trusted completely. I started with the public records. Morrow Systems had filed several documents over the past 3 years that were publicly accessible if you knew where to look and had the patience to read them. I am an event stylist who had once spent 6 hours researching the specific thread count of table linen for a client who could not tell the difference anyway. I had the patience. What I found in those documents did not immediately mean anything to me, but I knew someone who it would mean something to. A former client of mine named Deo, who had left a career in corporate law to become a chef and now ran a restaurant I styled the opening of 2 years ago. I called her at 11 at night, and I sent her everything I had, and I said, I need you to tell me if I am seeing what I think I am seeing. She called me back at 1 in the morning. She said, Zara, where did you get this? I said, I found it. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, Okay, here is what this is. The board crisis that Cale had described to me in the coffee shop, the 3 members who had tried to restructure his ownership, had not been a random power grab. They had been acting on behalf of a competing company that wanted to acquire Morrow Systems and had been systematically buying influence on the board for 18 months. The vote that Zola had cast in Cale's favor had not just been a small procedural thing. It had blocked an acquisition that would have cost Cale control of his own company. But here was the part that Deo said slowly, carefully, like she was choosing each word. The competing company that had been trying to acquire Morrow Systems had a parent company. And the parent company had a secondary holding entity. And that secondary holding entity had, as one of its silent investors, a name I recognized immediately. I said, Say it. She said the name. It was my father. I want you to let that sit for a moment. I need to sit with it again myself even now. My father, who had left our family when Zola and I were 11 years old and resurfaced periodically over the years in the way that absent fathers do, with birthday cards that arrived 2 weeks late and promises of visits that never materialized, was a silent investor in the company that had been trying to take Cale's business from him. Which meant that Zola's vote, the one that had protected Cale, the one that had started the personal relationship between them, had directly worked against our father's financial interests. Which meant that either Zola did not know, or Zola knew and had done it anyway, and either answer was significant in a different and equally destabilizing way. I sat on my kitchen floor for a while. Not because I was having a breakdown, though I was probably also having a breakdown. But because my kitchen floor is cold and cold things are grounding when your entire understanding of the last 2 years has just been rebuilt from scratch and the new version looks almost nothing like the old one. Here is where I need you to be honest with me in the comments, because I genuinely went back and forth on this for days. When you find out something like this, something that involves your sister and the man she is about to marry and your absent father, and what might be a years-long financial entanglement that has somehow been arranged around your life without your knowledge or participation, what do you do with it? The wedding was in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. I had ordered the flowers. I had confirmed the catering. I had personally sourced the table linen, the candles, the specific style of chair that Zola had seen in a magazine and become unreasonably devoted to. I had done all of this with my own professional expertise and my own quiet grief and my own determination to be a good sister and a good person and to not let old feelings make me into someone I did not want to be. And now I was sitting on my kitchen floor at 2 in the morning holding information that could detonate everything. I decided to go directly to the source. Not Zola. Kale. I know. I know what you are thinking. And you are not entirely wrong. But I want you to understand that I did not go to Kale out of some romantic motivation. I went to Kale because he was the only person in this entire situation who I believed might tell me the complete truth if asked directly. Not because he was a good person necessarily, but because he was a precise person. The kind of person who, when cornered by accuracy, would rather confirm it than insult both of you by denying it. I called his office line. His assistant told me he was unavailable. I said tell him Zara is calling about ZC Holdings and my father's name, and then say eternal promise and see what he says. There was a pause on the line that lasted long enough to be interesting. Then she put me through. He picked up immediately. He said, "Where are you?" I told him I was at a coffee shop, specifically the same coffee shop where we had spent 4 hours 2 years ago, which was either very poetic or extremely on the nose, and I genuinely could not decide which. He arrived 20 minutes later. He sat across from me, and he looked exactly the same as he always looked except for something in his eyes that I did not have a name for yet. I put what I had found on the table between us. Not literally. Metaphorically. I told him what I knew, what Deo had confirmed, what the documents suggested. I did not perform it. I did not cry. I delivered it the way I deliver a difficult conversation to a difficult client, factually and without drama, and then I looked at him and I waited. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Your father reached out to me personally 8 months ago." I said, "Tell me everything." He told me everything. Your father, he said, had been aware of Zola's investment in Moro Systems for some time. He did not explain how he knew. Your father had contacted Kale privately to suggest that Kale would benefit from getting closer to at least one of his daughters, specifically the one with the financial stake in his company. The framing had been that a family alliance of sorts would be mutually beneficial. That Zola, as a stakeholder, would be more motivated to continue supporting Kale's interests if the relationship was personal rather than purely financial. I said, "And what about me?" He said, "You were not part of the initial conversation." I said, "But I became part of it." He looked at me with that something in his eyes that I still did not have a name for, and he said, "I met you on a pavement and you knocked my phone out of my hand and told me you might cry about a perfume, and I sat in a coffee shop with you for 4 hours, and when I left I knew I was in trouble." I said, "But you chose her." He said, "I chose the version of things that made structural sense. Your sister had the financial stake. Your father was applying pressure. Choosing you would have complicated a situation that was already complicated enough." I want you to understand what he was telling me. He was telling me that he had felt something real with me and had walked away from it anyway because the architecture of the situation made me inconvenient. He was telling me that the choice between me and Zola had not been a romantic choice, but a strategic one. And he was telling me this in a coffee shop 3 weeks before his wedding to my sister. I picked up my coffee cup, looked at it for a moment, and then set it back down without throwing it at anyone, which I consider one of my greater achievements of self-regulation. I said, "Does Zola know about my father's involvement?" He said, "No." I said, "Does she know that he contacted you?" He said, "No." I said, "So she has no idea that her investment in your company was connected to our father's attempt to take your company. She has no idea that when she voted to protect you she was voting against him. She has no idea that any of this was ever about anything other than business and then feelings." He said, "That is correct." I sat back and looked at him and felt something very complicated moving through me. Because here was the thing. Here was the actual truth of it. My sister had not betrayed me as part of some calculated plan. She had fallen for a man she had a business connection to. She had let it happen without being fully honest with me about that connection, which was its own kind of wrong. But she had not known she was a piece on a board being moved by our father. She had not known that the man she was marrying had initially considered her because of a suggestion from a man who sent us late birthday cards and empty promises. She was, in her own way, also a victim of this. Just a victim who was about to marry the person at the center of it while wearing an extraordinary ring and living in a penthouse. I did not feel sorry for her immediately. I want to be honest about that. The feeling came later. In that moment, I mostly felt the specific exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just discovered that the thing is even heavier than they thought. I said to Kale, "What are you going to do?" He said, "I do not know." I said, "That is not good enough." He said, "Zara." And the way he said my name was the first crack in the contained, precise exterior he had maintained throughout the entire conversation. Just my name. But the way he said it carried something that I recognized and that I had spent 2 years trying to convince myself I had imagined. I said, "Do not do that." He said, "I know." I said, "You are getting married in 3 weeks." He said, "I know that too." I stood up. I left the coffee shop. I walked home and I sat on my kitchen floor again, which was rapidly becoming my emotional processing location of choice, and I thought about what I was going to do. Okay, I need you to stay with me because we're getting to the part of this story where I made a decision that surprised even me. Comment below and tell me what you would have done because I genuinely went back and forth on this for 72 hours and I am still not entirely certain I chose correctly. I called my father. I have not spoken extensively about my father in this story because he occupies a specific category in my life that is hard to describe. He is not a villain. He is not cruel. He is a man who made a series of choices that caused damage and then spent the rest of his life being vaguely aware of that damage without being willing to do the full work of addressing it. He sends late birthday cards. He makes promises about visits. He is present enough to create hope and absent enough to disappoint it, and he has been doing this for 16 years with a consistency that is almost impressive. I called him, and when he picked up I said, "Tell me about Kale Morrow." There was a silence that told me everything about what he already knew. Then he said, "Zara, I can explain." I said, "Please do not tell me you can explain. Just tell me the truth." He told me the truth. It was worse and more mundane than I expected, which is somehow always how it goes. He had made bad investments. Multiple bad investments over several years that had put him in a position where he needed significant returns quickly. The acquisition attempt on Morrow Systems had been part of a broader strategy to consolidate several tech assets and sell them to a larger player. It was not personal. It was just money. It was always just money with him. He had not anticipated that his younger daughter would cast the deciding vote against his interests. He had not known Zola was invested in Morrow Systems because Zola had made that investment privately and they had not spoken in years. When he found out, he had done what he always did with inconvenient truths. He had tried to manage them. He had reached out to Kale and attempted to reframe the situation into something that served everyone, or at least served him, which is not the same thing at all. I said, "Do you understand what you did to us? Not to your investment. To your daughters." He said, "Zara." I said, "Do not say my name like that. You do not get to say my name like that." And then, because I am apparently a person who makes significant life decisions in moments of extreme clarity, I said, "I am going to tell Zola everything. And I am going to tell Kale that if he does not tell her himself before I do, I will tell her with every single document in front of her." My father said, "You will destroy everything." I said, "You did that. I am just the one telling the truth about it." I hung up. Now here is where this story takes a turn that I did not write and could not have predicted, and which I think about regularly, because it revealed something about human beings that I did not fully understand until it happened to me. I went to Zola. I sat across from my twin sister in her extraordinary penthouse apartment with its floor-to-ceiling windows and its concierge who knew my name by now and its evidence of a life that had been built partly on a foundation that she did not know was there. And I told her everything. The documents. The holding company. Our father. Kale's coffee shop confession. All of it. I watched her face move through things in real time. Confusion first. Then the specific expression of someone doing rapid mental arithmetic. Then something that I can only describe as the ground shifting under her in a way she had not expected and was not prepared for. She did not cry immediately. Zola never cried immediately. She processed first, and then she cried. That was always her order of operations. She sat very still for a long time, and I sat across from her and I waited. Then she said, "He knew. When he first called me personally. He already knew about the vote, and he already knew about Dad. He knew all of it before he ever said anything personal to me." I said, "Yes." She said, "And he chose me because I was the financially strategic option." I said, "That is what he told me." She said, "But." I said, "But what?" She said, "But he loves me now." I know he does. Whatever it started as, it became real. I know the difference. And here is the thing. Here is the completely maddening, completely human, completely true thing about what she said. She was not wrong. I knew she was not wrong because I had sat across from Cale in that coffee shop 3 weeks earlier, and I had seen the crack in his exterior when he said my name. And I had also seen, underneath that crack, the way he looked when he talked about Zola. Not strategically. Not as a calculation. As someone who had started something for one reason and found himself somewhere entirely different and was not entirely sure what to do about the distance between the two places. He was in love with my sister. He had possibly also never fully stopped feeling something for me. And both of these things were true simultaneously, and there was no clean way to organize that into something manageable. This is the part where, in a different kind of story, I would have made a dramatic declaration. Where I would have said the things I had been carrying for 2 years and Cale would have realized he had chosen wrong and Zola would have stepped aside and everyone would have found their correct places. I did not do that. I want to tell you why. Because I was sitting across from my twin sister who was looking at me with her whole face open in a way I had not seen from her in 2 years, the careful performance gone, just Zola, and she was frightened. Not of losing Cale specifically. Of finding out that something she had believed was real had started as a transaction. That is a specific kind of grief, and it was written all over her face, and I knew it, because I had been wearing it quietly for 2 years without fully admitting it to myself. I said, "What do you want to do?" She said, "I need to talk to him." I said, "I know." She said, "Zara, I am sorry. I know I should have told you about the investment. I know I should have told you when you told me his name that I already knew who he was. I was afraid of what it would look like, and I told myself it did not matter, because he ended things with you, and I convinced myself the timing made it okay. I knew it did not make it okay. I just needed it to." I said, "I know." She said, "That is all you are going to say." I said, "I have been carrying things for 2 years. I am tired of carrying them. You tell him the truth and you figure out what is real between you and you stop building things on things you have not looked at directly. And I need you to stop making decisions around me without telling me. I am your twin sister. I am not a complication in your life. I am your person. You should have told me." She started crying then. And I, despite everything, despite 2 years of hurt and mustard bridesmaid dresses and kitchen floor breakdowns, reached across and held her hand because she was still my twin. She was still the person I had whispered to in the dark and grown up alongside, and she was still mine in the way that people can be yours even when they have hurt you badly. "We are a mess," Zola said through her crying, and I laughed. A real laugh. The unexpected kind. I said, "We really are." What happened next took 3 weeks, and I am going to tell you all of it, because you deserve the full story. Zola confronted Cale. Not gently. My careful, composed, measured sister looked the man she was engaged to in the eye and asked him to account for every piece of it. I know this because she called me immediately afterward and told me everything. Cale confirmed everything he had told me. He did not try to manage it or reframe it. He sat with the full weight of it, and he let her be angry, and when she was done being angry, he told her something that he had not told me in that coffee shop. He told her that the original reason for calling her personally had been strategic. That her father had planted the idea and that the business logic had made it seem reasonable at the time. But that within weeks of actually knowing her he had stopped thinking about it in those terms entirely and had not thought about it that way since. That the man who had made that initial calculation felt like a stranger to him now. That he should have told her this from the beginning. That not telling her was the thing he was most ashamed of. Zola told me this, and then she said, "What do I do with that?" I said, "What do you want to do with it?" She said, "I want to believe him." I said, "Does it feel true?" She said, "Yes." Which is either because it is true or because I am a fool. I said, "You are not a fool. You are someone who fell in love without knowing all the information. That is just being human." She said, "That is very generous of you considering." I said, "I know. Write that down." She laughed. It was the first time we had laughed together in what felt like a very long time. Now, the wedding. I know you have been waiting for the wedding. I want to tell you something about the wedding that is going to restructure everything you have been imagining about how this ends. The wedding happened. It was beautiful in the way that things you have poured yourself into are always beautiful, not because they are perfect, but because the effort is visible in every detail. The flowers were tall, as Zola had wanted, and the venue coordinator had been wrong about the low ones. Tall was absolutely the right call. The chairs were exactly the right chairs. The candles were lit at exactly the right moment. The table linen had a thread count that exactly one person in the room could appreciate fully, and that person was me. I stood at the front of that venue in the mustard dress, which Zola had tried to change after everything that had happened, and I had refused because at that point the mustard dress had become a personal symbol of something I could not entirely articulate, but felt was important to honor. And I watched my twin sister walk down the aisle. And I felt proud of her. Not despite everything. Including everything. Because she had looked at a hard truth and not run from it. Because she had confronted the person she loved and demanded honesty, and then made a decision based on what she actually found rather than what she wished she had found. That takes something. Especially when what you find is complicated. Cale stood at the end of that aisle and watched her walk toward him, and he looked like a man who understood exactly how much he had been given and exactly how much he had nearly lost through his own choices, and was going to spend a significant amount of time being grateful for the gap between those two things. He looked at me once, briefly, as Zola reached him. Just a look. Nothing performed in it. Just acknowledgement. I gave him a small nod that said, "I see you, and we are fine, and you had better be exactly what she deserves from this point forward, or I will make your life professionally difficult in ways that are creative and persistent. I am an event stylist. I know everyone. That is not an empty threat. Now, here is the part you did not see coming. Here is the part that I did not see coming, and I was there. The reception. 3 hours in. I was at the bar ordering a drink that I had fully earned when someone sat down on the stool next to mine. I looked over, and the person was someone I did not recognize. Which was unusual because I had planned this wedding and I knew everyone on the guest list personally. He was maybe 30. Interesting face. The kind of face that is not immediately striking, but becomes more interesting the longer you look at it. He was wearing a suit that fit well in the specific way that suggests someone who does not usually wear suits, but has made a genuine effort. He looked slightly like someone who had shown up to a foreign country without a phrase book and was managing through sheer optimism. I said, "Who are you?" He said, "I am Moro Systems' new head of infrastructure. Cale invited me. I do not really do weddings." I said, "This is going well for someone who does not do weddings." He said, "I knocked over a centerpiece on the way to my seat." I said, "Tall or low flowers?" He looked at me. He said, "What?" I said, "The centerpiece. Were the flowers tall or low?" He said, "Tall. Very tall. Honestly, it was almost impressive how tall." I said, "It was the right call. The tall ones were always right." He said, "I believe you. I am Dammy, by the way." I said, "Zara." He said, "I know who you are. You planned this wedding. Cale talks about you sometimes. He says you are very good at what you do." I said, "Is that all he says?" He said, "He says you are the reason this wedding almost did not happen and also the reason it is happening." He said that is exactly the kind of complicated he should have expected from someone who can make mustard look like a deliberate fashion choice. I looked down at my dress. I looked back at him. I said, "This is absolutely a deliberate fashion choice." He said, "I believe you." I said, "You are a bad liar." He said, "I know. It has always been a problem." He smiled when he said it, and it was a real smile, the kind that catches a person off guard, and I thought, oh no, not here. Not at this wedding. Not in this dress. Absolutely not. Reader, it was in this dress. We talked for 2 hours. I did not plan to. I was supposed to be coordinating the transition to the dessert course and confirming the timing on the cake and making sure the photographer had everything she needed for the final family portrait. I did approximately none of those things because Dammy, who did not do weddings and had knocked over a tall centerpiece on his way to his seat, turned out to be the kind of person who made the rest of the room feel slightly irrelevant. He was not flashy. He was not performing. He was genuinely curious about everything, asked questions that were specific and listened to the answers like they mattered, and laughed at the right moments with a laugh that was too big for the suit he was wearing and all the better for it. By the time I remembered I had a job to do, the cake had already been cut by someone acting on their own initiative, and the photographer had managed without me, and the family portrait had happened with Zola looking luminous and Kale looking like a man who had made good decisions in the end, and me visible in the background gesturing at something I cannot now identify. At the end of the night, Dammy asked me for my number. I said, I should tell you that I am slightly complicated. He said, I knocked over a tall flower arrangement at a billionaire's wedding. Complicated is fine. I gave him my number. And then I went and hugged my sister for a long time, and she hugged me back, and we did not say anything because we did not need to. I want to tell you where things are now because you came this far and you deserve the full picture. Zola and Kale have been married for 8 months. It is not a perfect marriage because there is no such thing as a perfect marriage, only two people deciding every day to be honest with each other and do the work. They are doing the work. Kale told her about my father without being asked to. He made sure my father's involvement in the board crisis became part of the public record in a way that cost my father the last of the investment strategy he had been trying to protect. I am not going to pretend that did not feel like a small, specific satisfaction. It did. I am human. My father called me after it happened. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was long and complicated and that I have listened to twice and have not yet decided what to do with. That is a story for another day, when I have figured out how much of him I want in my life and in what form. Dr. Adissa says I am making good progress on that particular drawer. I believe her. My business has grown. In the months after the wedding, I picked up 4 new clients, one of them a referral from Kale's professional network, which I took because the work is good and because I decided I was done making my professional life smaller to manage my personal complications. I am not comfortable in the guacamole way anymore. I am comfortable in a way that feels like something I built on purpose, which is a different and significantly better feeling. And Dammy, who does not do weddings and knocked over a tall centerpiece and is a bad liar and laughs too big for his suits. We have been seeing each other for 7 months. It is early. It is complicated in the way that things worth having are usually complicated. He is patient in ways I did not know I needed someone to be patient with me. I am loud and clumsy and I talk too much, and twice I have knocked things over in his apartment, and both times he has looked at me with the specific fond exasperation of someone who was warned and chose to proceed anyway. Last week he bought me a bottle of perfume. He set it on my kitchen counter without ceremony and said, "It is not called Eternal Promise. It is called something much less dramatic. But it is good." I opened it. It smelled like something real. Not a garden on a corporate pavement. Just something warm and good and present. I said, "How did you know what to get?" He said, "Kale told me the story. About the perfume on the pavement and the 4 hours in the coffee shop." He said it was the beginning of a series of events that eventually resulted in the best wedding he had ever attended despite nearly not attending it at all. He said to tell you he is sorry. That it took him too long to say that, but he means it. I stood in my kitchen holding a bottle of perfume that did not have a dramatic name and thought about the drawer in my brain that I had been stuffing things into for 2 years. The things I had filed as not important. The flash on Zola's face. The quiet in the car. The practice speech on the phone. I had seen all of it, and I had put it away because the alternative was too much to hold at the time. But I had held it eventually. I had sat on my kitchen floor and I had opened the drawer and I had looked at everything directly, and it had been hard and complicated, and occasionally I had knocked things over in the process, which is frankly on brand. But I had gotten through the other side of it, and the other side looked like this. Like my sister's real laughter on the phone on a Sunday morning. Like a business that is mine in every way that matters. Like a man who bought me ordinary perfume and said it like it was enough, which it was, which it absolutely was. The mustard dress is still in my wardrobe. I have not worn it again. But I have not thrown it away either. Some things you keep to remind yourself of what you survived. Some things you keep because they are the beginning of a story that turned out to be worth telling. If you made it to the end of this, I need you to know that means something to me. Subscribe if you have not. Come back next time. And drop a comment telling me one thing you have been filing in the wrong drawer that you know you need to look at eventually. I promise you, looking at it is better than carrying it. Even when what you find is complicated. Especially then.